Hello and welcome to the Sandip Roy Show on Express Audio.
The Sandip Roy Show.
They may be the biggest pop stars you have never heard of. They don't show up on your social media feed, but they are part of the pop culture being consumed by millions. If the word Hindutva makes you think of Ram temples and rallies filled with men in saffron robes and loudspeakers blaring slogans, think again. Hindutva comes with its own popular culture with DJ beats, and some of that content isn't just about Deshbhakti or Hindu values. Journalist Kunal Purohit says it can give hate a catchy beat. In his new book, Kunal Purohit explores the world of what he calls H-pop, the secretive world of Hindutva pop stars, from songs to Kavi Sammelans to publishing houses. Kunal Purohit joins us on the show. Kunal Purohit, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Sandip. It's a pleasure being here.
The title of your book says Secretive World of Hindutva Pop Stars. But as I read it, I was wondering, what is secretive about it? I mean, it seems to be hiding in plain sight, quoted by politicians, appearing in rallies.
I think the reason why I wrote the book, and I think that also somewhere answers your question, is, the fact that this world exists without most of us especially in metro cities, for instance, not having any idea of who these people are. These are literally, as I call it in the book, they are pop stars of the world. They are rock stars in some ways, enjoying mass followings, and yet they remain out of the limelight. They will never pop up on our screens. They will never pop up on our social media feeds, and yet they exist. And I think secretive is the way to describe some of the sort of workings of their world. What we do know, even when you go beyond the metro cities into, rural and semi-rural India, you see the existence of these players and you see what they're trying to do. But what you don't really understand is how they're all interconnected and how they're all united by one goal, which is to further Hindutva thought.
And when you say that is their one goal, to further Hindutva thought, is this a phenomenon that has happened in the last 10 years, or is it a much older story?
So my book also tells you a bit about how there are certain historical patterns to all of them. We're looking at poetry, music, and literature. And it's no one's argument that Hindutva was not being furthered by these three mediums before 2014. But I think what is interesting is that the nature of all of these three formats has undergone a massive transformation in a way that it's way more organized, it's way more effective, and it's way more in sync with the agenda of the ruling party, the BJP, as well as the broader Hindutva ecosystem, which is, the BJP, the RSS, and all of the other aligned outfits combined. And I think this kind of coordination that I've seen between all of them is something that we've not seen before this. And that is something which is very new.
Are you making the argument that when you say they are in sync with the agenda of the BJP and RSS, is that they happen to be people who agree with their ideology and so are in sync, or that they are so big now because the BJP and RSS is in a way funding or at least organizing them to move the chariot forward, as it were?
It's a bit of everything, Sandip. We're seeing that, to be in sync with Hindutva thought and to produce some of this content is great business. I mean, let's remember that the BJP now enjoys a brute majority and vast presence across the country. So, to be in tune with the ruling party and with such a powerful ruling dispensation means great business. It means lucrative commerce. But as I see in the book and as I report in the book, I also find evidence that this is not really very organic as well. There is the nudging, there is the helping, there is the prodding by the BJP, by the RSS, and by the affiliated Hindutva organizations. So I see evidence of both. I see cynical calculations by some of these characters, which drives them to produce some of this content. But I also see that it is being done and orchestrated by parties very, very close to the ruling dispensation.
Yeah, because clearly the ruling dispensation understands the power of popular culture very much. But how did you first sense the power of this world?
I mean, like most of us, Sandeep, I was quite blissfully unaware of this world that I've described in the book. But all of that changed in that one night in April 2019 when I was sent on a reporting trip by an organization called indiaspend.com. They used to run a hate watch tracker. So I was sent to actually cover a hate crime that had happened in a small town in Jharkhand called Gumla. And when I went there, I was talking to locals, I was reporting, and I was trying to understand what had happened. What I did realize was that there was a Ram Navami procession that had taken place in that town, like it had been for years and years and years. And the town had a very syncretic practice where eminent Muslims from the town would gather outside the town's Jama Masjid and they would welcome the Ram Navami procession. They would give them garlands, they would give them refreshments, except in that one last year, which is 2018. So this is a year before I went to Gumla. What did end up happening was that there was a procession that did come as always, but as soon as it entered the lane which houses the Jama Masjid, the procession, suddenly turned very, very boisterous and aggressive. Now, for all of the locals who were gathered, this was quite a bit of surprise because this is, as I said, this has always been a very amicable, a very sort of harmonious exercise. Except that night, something had changed. And when I tried to investigate what happened, I realized that the thing that had changed from the past to that procession in 2018 was that procession was playing songs which were extremely derogatory towards Muslims and, played with all of these DJ beats. And then you have to remember these processions are basically a whole convoy of vehicles. They're whole convoys of trucks and lorries which are full of massive speakers and amplifiers. And the crowds are really roused in the spirit of the festival. Except that these, from bhajans and devotional songs in 2018, they had started playing songs which were attacking the Muslims, which were really egging the processionists on to be very aggressive towards Muslims. And that song had really triggered a very different behavior in the procession that year. But, the procession passed off peacefully, nothing really happened. Except that night, when some of the people from that procession were going back, they encountered a Muslim boy who was 20 years old at that point, Mohammed Shalik, and he was standing with a Hindu girl in a village not more than 4 kilometers away from the spot of the procession. And some of the members of the mob went and lynched Mohammed Shalik to death, only because he was a Muslim hanging out with a Hindu woman. So that is really what prompted me to look at what those songs were about. And then, as I write in the book, that was just really the tip of the iceberg, because wherever I went to in Jharkhand, and I covered about 5 different districts, every district had seen similar episodes where crowds, Hindu crowds, sort of mobilized by Hindu right-wing organizations in many cases, were roused and were sort of, driven up into a frenzy because of the songs that were played in processions.
Now, some would say, Kunal, that how can we draw a line from the song to that mob frenzy? This might have just been people who were itching to pick a fight, or they were just aggressive anyway. Can we say that the song spurred them on to some kind of mob frenzied attack?
Absolutely, and that's a very valid argument to make, Sandeep. And it would be truer if it was an isolated incident. What we've been seeing since then is that this is a part of a larger pattern where songs have been repeatedly deployed in different circumstances to create a frenzied mob. The songs are triggering off patterns of behavior which were not seen in places like Gumla, for instance. And I'll give you a similar example of Mumbai this year when the Ram Navami procession, again, a procession that has never really caused any trouble in my city here, and I've stayed here all my life. This year in the procession, there were some of these incendiary songs played as a part of the procession right outside the mosque. And a lot of the locals told me that they found it rather hurtful that, these songs were being played in their presence. And that somehow also triggered some of the clashes. And, a very simple exercise, Sandeep. I mean, if you just go to YouTube and if you search for Ram Navami music and Ram Navami processions, you will find videos, and this is evidence of how groups of Ram Navami processionists would get out and then, would sort of pass through Muslim dominated areas or areas outside mosques and then play songs like Mulle ki topi gira do, and, things which sort of mean that the masjid has to be demolished and stuff. So I think what we're looking at is a rather dangerous and a very alarming pattern.
Now, you, as part of this book, talk to some of the people who produce these songs, who sing these songs, who write the lyrics. And when you talk to them, did you ask them about this aspect? what you're saying right now, that the songs are provoking crowds to do something that they had never done before?
So I think they have a very sort of interesting take on the whole situation. They say that what we're writing and what we're singing is a sentiment that exists in the minds and hearts of people anyway. We're just the ones who are voicing them. We're not the ones who are giving birth to those sentiments. What they're also saying is that the violence that happens, or, the behavior of the mobs that we see isn't only because of their songs. It's because of a lot of factors. And then they, of course, defended the songs and said that that is not a result of the song alone. But they do sort of confide and confirm with me about the fact that these songs do trigger off certain sentiments, except that they don't give birth to them. But the way they look at this, Sandip, is that they believe that they're doing God's work by speaking of these things. So often they feel that this is their this is their holy duty to be speaking and making Hindus aware of all of these problems. My principal character in the book is a female singer called Kavi Singh. You will see in the book how she, completely believes that what she's doing is a result of, some divine blessing that has been bestowed upon her to do this work, to make Hindus aware of their enemies, which are Muslims in her belief, and to make Hindus aware of the problems that Hindus face. For instance, she believes very strongly that they face a very imminent Islamic takeover. She tells me how Facebook, for instance, takes action against her, YouTube takes action against her, and yet she will continue doing what she's doing because it is her duty. So in some ways, the result of what she does is not something that she's very concerned with. It's her actions alone that she sort of wants to continue focusing on.
Oh, tell us why you chose Kavi Singh, because as you write in the book, the space is of the pops, the singers, is actually largely male. She's sort of an exception there.
And I mean, as a journalist, for me, that is what was fascinating, Sandeep. I've reported on the Hindu right-wing ecosystem for a few years now, and I see that, as you rightly said, most of it, not just in the music space, but most of that space is very male-dominant, and it is very, very masculine. And Kavi Singh is interesting because she's not that. She's a woman. She is someone who married, so she's a loving daughter. But then she transforms herself into this somewhat masculine Kavi Singh who's singing all of these songs. And for me, it was interesting to see how a woman survives in that space.
And when you say transform herself, you mean her looks, because she wears a turban and stuff.
Her looks, yes, but also I think her personality. I think in the book you will see how, she becomes a different person when she dresses up and when she dons the avatar of Kavi Singh the singer. It's almost like there are two different people who exist. And that for me is fascinating for me. It's almost like a character that she's playing, except one that she firmly believes is very true to her.
I want the listeners to get a little sense of her.
It's, in a way, it's her first ever song that she sung. The song is by the name of Pulwama. This was just after, and we all know of the terror attack that happened in Pulwama, where over 40 paramilitary personnel were killed in a suicide bomb attack. And, India has a history of terror attacks, except in that particular moment when the attack happened, we were all grieving, we were all angry. It is the worst terrorist attack on our paramilitary forces in peacetime. And so while some of us were, looking for answers as to how the attack could have been allowed to happen and, just sort of trying to figure out who is accountable for the deaths of those soldiers, Kavi Singh goes on to, and she gets a poem, and then she goes on to sing this song and create this song, which very conveniently pushes the responsibility of the attack not on the terrorist alone, and then neither the accountability at the government's doorstep, but she says that it's not the terrorist or it's not our neighboring country which is to be blamed for the attack. It is the people living inside India, the people living amongst us. And then the song then goes on to sort of dog whistle around the identity of Kashmiris and Kashmiri Muslims. And what we see after that, Sandip, is what is so fascinating to me and also so alarming, is that we see attacks in different states. We saw Kashmiri Muslim students being evicted out of hostels, Kashmiri traders who were out selling their wares being told to wrap up and go home. We saw violence against Kashmiri Muslims. So what the song really did, and then it was viral because people were making lip-sync videos out of it and stuff, and it's got a few million views now.
I was thinking that you said, this is something that she believes she was ordained to do. But obviously, this was her first song. It goes viral and everything. For most of these singers, do people like Kavi Singh have huge concerts? Or are they more like YouTube phenomenons who benefit by the fact that we have such cheap mobile internet data?
So it's a bit of both, Sandeep. I think there are different models at work here. Some of them, like Kavi Singh, like Kanhaiya Mittal, these are both sort of very popular singers. They both have a lot of events that they do, but some do more than others. So Kavi Singh, for instance, I think because of the pandemic, a lot of their events shut down, and she was doing events between Feb 2019 to say March 2020. She did a bunch of events and concerts going around. And then from March 2020 onwards, really, because the industry shut down, because we were all at home, she shifted to the online and the digital medium a lot more seriously. But ever since restrictions were lifted, some of them, so Kavi Singh has been slow, and in the book I mention her journey as to just what prompted her to go slow on the physical and the outdoor concerts. But some others like Kanhaiya Mittal, for instance, is prolific because he does shows everywhere, right from the north, right from Punjab to UP to Haryana to Bihar. So he's constantly traveling to Madhya Pradesh. So there are some of them who travel a lot. They also build their online constituencies, whereas there are some who focus more on the online. So I think it's also a matter of privilege, right? Because it also takes a lot more money to be able to go out and sort of travel.
But when they have shows, is it like an H-pop concert, or are they, just one among, who is organizing it and all of that?
The reason why this is so fascinating and yet so alarming is because, as you said, the concerts are not organized or sort of, advertised as Hindutva concerts. Some of the concerts that I went to, some of the events that I went to, for instance, Kanhaiya Mittal's, I went to his show in Delhi. Now, the show is largely about, devotional songs that he would sing because his background was as a devotional singer, whereas Kavi never had that background, but he does. And for the most part of the concert, he would sing devotional songs because that is what got him to be so popular. And in 2021, when Uttar Pradesh voted for the state assembly elections, he came out with a song that catapulted him into another level of popularity. And the song was called Jo Ram ko laaye hain, hum unko laenge, यूपी में फिर से हम भगवा लहराएंगे. So that song was an unabashed endorsement of the BJP, and then it goes on to talk about how Yogi is the best person for the job, etc., etc. And I find these two worlds, the intersection of these two worlds and the convergence of these two worlds is what is so dangerous as well. Because, the devotional singer that you've been constantly listening to, you've been sort of idolizing, you've been really invested in their popularity, then starts taking a turn towards Hindutva and starts peddling the Hindutva agenda to you in the name of music and devotion and everything else. So, there are no lines that the lines really get blurred. One thing flows into another.
But some would say, Kunal, what is wrong with that? If your devotional singer suddenly starts singing a song really espousing the values of secularism or something, no one has a problem. If he's espousing the cause of Hindus, then everyone is up in arms. And people will say, that's unfair. As a singer, you should sing about what you believe in.
Absolutely. And I think if the conversation was just about espousing Hindu values, I think none of us would have an issue with it. The problem here becomes, Sandip, that most of these songs are very, very Islamophobic, and they constantly seek to stoke anger and hate against one community of the country. They are targeted towards questioning the existence of that community. I mean, the problem is not when, it is a devotional song about Hindu values. I don't think most of us would have had a problem with it. The problem exists, and the problem comes to birth when the songs are then targeted towards a certain community.
Can you give some examples of what kind of things the songs are saying that perhaps politician in government cannot?
So the songs would often sort of target the existence of mosques, so they would talk about that. They would talk about the country becoming a Hindu Rashtra, for instance. There is a very famous song called Har Ghar Bhagwa Chhayega, Ram Rajya Fir Aayega. Ek hi nara, ek hi naam, Jai Shri Ram, Jai Shri Ram. And then it talks about very political sort of agendas of the Hindu right wing, so talking about banning cow slaughter and things like that. And in it, very subliminally, it creates an enemy of those people who seem to be opposed to any of the agendas.
Who was the singer?
Again, this is an interesting part because a lot of them, are these tracks that are created without any one singer to it. They were basically tracks and audio tracks created, some time ago. And then they were given a new lease of life with, digital tools on the computer. So say DJ beats and, all kinds of trance beats and stuff. So for instance, this song, it's very difficult to now tell who the singer is because there are so many different versions to it. If you go online and search, you will not be able to tell which of the versions was the original one and which was the one that came later. And that is also the larger story of, songs in this zone. Even Jo Ram Ko Laaye Hai, for instance, it has now been sung by quite a few other people. But because I had, sort of firsthand seen when the song was released, I know it is originally sung by Kanhaiya Mittal. If you go to Instagram, if you go to YouTube Shorts, you will see lots of people, lots of young people making reels, making shorts out of that. So in a way, these songs then, stop being played at just concerts or rallies or processions, but then they seep into your everyday and somewhere sort of absorb the messaging on it on an everyday basis. And that is what is rather insidious about this sort of brand of pop culture.
Are there actually production houses that are devoted to this, or are these lone kids sitting at their computers with software mixing and producing new versions?
So these can be a bit of both. There are certain production houses, and again, most of them are digital only. So their work will end at releasing YouTube videos. So the same production house will, on a Monday release a romantic song. On a Tuesday, will release a patriotic song. On a Wednesday, it will have a religious song. And then one of the days will be a Hindutva Pop song. And that is how most of these guys survive, because then they present a bouquet of options to people. So, but yeah, there are production houses which actively promote and actively sort of push songs like these and I spoke to some of them for the book and they tell me how it is great business. They tell me that, and their YouTube analytics show them that wherever the BJP is rather popular or wherever Hindutva forces are dominant is where this stuff does very well for them. So they actively try and push this stuff as much as they can.
And in fact, you find out, even with Kavi Singh, is that while she thinks she's divinely ordained to this after the Pulwama song becomes a viral hit, she does try other kinds of songs about, more generic songs about voting, mythological figures, in the same ballpark of her interests, but not as polarizing. But they don't do as well as, say, when she does a song about 370 in Kashmir. So is there a kind of opportunism here also that's pushing her more towards polarizing content?
Absolutely. And I mean, there is, I think, a mix of opportunism where they're seeing, and in the book I talk about how the father-daughter duo also sort of tells me that for them to be able to make it viral, they need to be, pushing it at a certain time just after an event like Article 370 happens and stuff. So they're very acutely aware that there is opportunism there. But I think they also become prisoners of their own images, Sandip, where, because they've got the popularity doing a certain kind of thing, for them to now break that image and do something else just means that they end up losing the flock of followers who came to them when they first did that Hindutva Pop song. So unfortunately, then they have to keep, repeating and keep pushing the boundary in that same genre.
And as an artist, is someone like Kavi Singh aware of this constraint? I mean, does she think of herself as an artist even, and therefore she should be free to do other things, or almost like an activist?
I mean, she thinks of herself as both an artist, whose skills allow her to do the kind of activism that she believes in. So that is really the space that she imagines herself in. She has a very clear roadmap in front of her as to just where she wants the art to take her ultimately. So yes, she is an artist with very definite goals, and the activism that she wants to do also has very clear-cut goals for herself.
But what was interesting also for me while reading the book, Kunal, is to realize that she and many of the other people you talk to actually grew up knowing and having Muslim friends, but they seem to still have no problem espousing a view where the basic premise is something politicians don't want to say, that Hindus and Muslims cannot peaceably coexist in this country. And, once you've come to that premise, there's very little wiggle room to find middle ground anymore. But they don't see that as in any way dissonance with having Muslim friends or growing up with Muslim friends?
I mean, this was the interesting bit for me. And this was a bit of a personal note for myself, where I told myself that when I start doing this book and when I start meeting all of these people, I really wanted to understand what the point of radicalization was for them, right? And for me, I mean, I've grown to believe on all of my reporting years that I think it's early life experiences which sort of tend to trigger your political ideology. And now there is also, of course, research which sort of I've quoted in the book, which talks about how when you have early life traumas, they tend to push you towards the right side of the political divide. And this is exactly also what has happened with all of the three principal characters in the book. I talk of their childhood in great detail because I really want people to know that they were not born into situations which directly sort of pushed them into being a communal figure. They slowly got there. In terms of your question about the dissonance, I think some of them do feel the dissonance. They do sense that what they're saying and some of their interpersonal relationships with Muslims, for instance, don't really go hand in hand. For instance, Kavi tells me, and I sort of quiz her about some very beneficial relationships that she has with Muslims in her life. And she says, but these are the good ones. These are not those guys that I talk about in my songs.
How long do you think, Kunal, before this goes really mainstream? As you say, some of the production companies say, in certain states that BJP enjoys a good majority, these songs do really well. But it's still the secretive world.
Sandip, they have gone mainstream. And when I say that, I look at films like the Kashmir Files and the Kerala Story. What we are now seeing is that there is a model that has ticked, a model that you can employ propaganda which is not based on facts, propaganda which clearly tarnishes and targets one community, and you can reap very, very rich dividends from it. Right? You can earn Bollywood success, and this is mainstream Bollywood success. I mean, I remember reading newspaper reports when both of these movies released, where Bollywood figures and Hindi film industry figures were envious of the kind of collections that these two films did at a time when no other film was able to make it big. And I think what we're seeing, Sandeep, is that it's really going to be opening the doors for more such films to be made, more such documentaries to be made. I think we are slowly already seeing the process of them being mainstreamed in every aspect, not just in music, books or poetry, but also in formats like cinema.
And, we might well have someone like a Kavi singing for the next Kerala Story.
Absolutely. I mean, I see the worlds colliding very soon.
If H-pop, as you call it, is so successful at othering Muslims, is there an M-pop that is doing the reverse?
Not necessarily. I mean, I've tried to look for some evidence, but I have to admit that was not the purpose of my study. I didn't find too much evidence to, say that there is an M-pop that is equal in stature and possibly rivaling H-pop. But what I do find, especially in Maharashtra, where I'm based, Sandeep, is that there has been a tendency, for instance, there is a show, and I'm yet to find the origins of the show, but the show is based on the life of Aurangzeb. And I find certain quarters of the Muslim youth, in Maharashtra at least, constantly using clips from that show and putting them up as WhatsApp statuses, as Instagram reels, as YouTube shorts. So there is almost a cult following of sorts around the figure of Aurangzeb, which is very strange because we've not seen that in all of these years. What has happened is in Maharashtra, that has triggered sort of a backlash amongst the Hindu right wing. So what we've seen close to 10 cases, 10 FIRs being filed against Muslims in Maharashtra because they've uploaded, these videos and photos and status messages that I told you about, which hail Aurangzeb. So my fear is that we are going to see these efforts to use popular culture by different people to further their own hardline agendas and ideologies.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the poetry, Kunal. We don't think of poetry necessarily in sort of hate music or in this sphere, but you profile a poet named Kamal Agne. And what is it like to go to a Kavi Sammelan with somebody like Kamal Agne performing?
It was fascinating because I traveled to different places with him, Sandeep. I traveled to UP, I traveled to Bihar, and then, of course, in Delhi, and I saw clips of his performances from across different states. What is fascinating is how someone like Kamal Agne can start off being a Deshbhakt Kavi. He's a Deshbhakt poet who only cares about the country and gets the listener hooked onto that idea. And he slowly takes their hand and he walks across the aisle to the Hindutva side of things and convinces them that patriotism and Hindu nationalism are one and the same. If you believe in Hindutva, you are a Deshbhakt. So he will talk about, things like the soldier on the border. He will talk about the farmer. He will have very sort of generic tropes about patriotism that he will throw in. And then from there on, he slowly, takes things one notch higher with each poem, right? So he then starts attacking Pakistan, taking it one notch higher. He starts attacking people inside India who he thinks are basically agents of Pakistan. And then he starts targeting the opposition parties like the Congress. He will target Rahul Gandhi. He will target Mehbooba Mufti. And slowly, you see that what started off as Desh Bhakti poetry about soldiers and about India has gone into poetry which really backs only the BJP and Modi and tarnishes everyone else but the BJP and Prime Minister Modi.
And it's not just the Prime Minister Modi or the BJP, where you can say that this is a poet, like some poets might support the Congress and Rahul Gandhi, some poets might support BJP, which in itself is fine. But these are poems, and I wanted to listen to a clip if we have one. These are poems that then ultimately go to Mahatma Gandhi and even talking about Godse.
Absolutely. And this is in fact his most popular work, which really justifies in some ways and hails Gandhi's assassination by Godse. And I think it'll be great to listen to it just for people to get a sense of what it is.
Let's listen.
ऐसी गोली मारी उनको याद आ गए श्री राम, जिनकी भूलों के कारण भारत के हिंदू चले गए। वे बापू हे राम बोलकर देवलोक को चले गए। नातू ने अपनी मातृभूमि को सब कुछ अर्पण कर डाला।
While listening to this, Kunal, I was thinking that I remembered right before the elections when BJP politician made comments sort of that sounded like they were hailing Godse. Prime Minister Modi had to step in and say how he was deeply hurt by that and, how he could never forgive her. Does someone like Kamal Agni reciting these poems not get him into any trouble? Nobody files an FIR, nobody comes after him?
Quite the contrary, Sandeep. I mean, in fact, as I said, the poem catapulted Kamal into, a different level of fame and popularity, where when he now travels to places, people remember him as the poet who sung that poetry on Godse and Gandhi. He introduces himself to people and then people say, oh yes, I remember your work. You were that guy who spoke about Gandhi and Godse and that was fantastic. I was tracking this whole debate around, sort of glorifying Godse and things. And in fact, his poem was one of the first movers of that debate. It was one of the first things because this came way back in 2017, which was much before Pragya Singh Thakur became the MP and things. But it was in some ways one of the prime movers of this whole, re-looking at the legacy of Gandhi and sort of justifying or hailing Godse's act.
But is someone like him or the poets that you talk to, are they poets for hire? And by which I mean, are they somewhere where an outfit like the VHP or Bajrang Dal would call them and say, write poems about such and such subject?
So I don't want to spell out too much, and I know you know this, but in the book I do describe how there are these alliances that are created between poets like Kamal and bodies like the Vishwa Hindu Parishad and the Bajrang Dal, affiliated organizations of the BJP and the RSS. He has campaigned for the BJP, and you know this, Sandip. And I asked him, I said, so, does that just make you a campaigner for hire? Just very similar to what you asked me. And he says, I will campaign, yes, and I can be hired, but I will campaign on issues or for people or ideologies which match mine. So I will not campaign for a Shiv Sena now that it has gone with the Congress.
Did it surprise you, Kunal, about the power of poetry? Because in our sort of Anglophone world, publishers are so reluctant to publish poetry books. They're like, oh, the power of popular songs with disco beats, or we can sort of understand. Rap, we can sort of understand. But does it surprise you that poetry is so powerful in this ecosystem?
I mean, yes and no. We've known that India's always had a very rich culture of Kavi Sammelans, which are very massive poetry recital competitions, especially in the north, east and central of India. So we've known that there is that history. I think what surprised me and what fascinated me also, Sandeep, is that the internet has, far from killing the format, it has really just added to the format, because now Kavi Sammelans earlier used to be a physical affair where, anywhere from a few hundred to tens to thousands of people would come and sort of see the performance. But now, because of the internet and because of YouTube, there are specialized handles, YouTube channels, which are focused only on bringing out and sort of telecasting Kavi Sammelans from across the country. So what has happened as a result of that is that poets like Kamal, with their brand of Hindutva poetry, have really gone viral and become very, very popular in that space. And the confluence of the online space and the offline space is such that because he's now viral on the internet, he gets more shows on the ground and he gets more Kavi Sammelans to perform on.
When you said that shows that that people watch his videos and then they book him for on-ground events, that made me think, Kunal, how much of an income do they actually make? Can you get rich off H-pop? Can you make a good living off H-pop?
Absolutely. I mean, many of them, even if they don't have the shows, they earn very well from the internet and they earn very well from their YouTube and Facebook presence because they've got millions of followers, millions of people who are listening to their work and stuff. So there is definitely that chance of, you earning very well just off the internet. But in addition to that, all of the three are also doing other things to augment their income from the internet. So in the case of Kamal, he's doing a lot of the poetry work. And now with all of these years of experience and, him going viral, his work being shared by some Bollywood celebrities, and I don't want to name them in the show, but, I put them in the book as well. All of this has only led to him jacking up the price. So now it depends on where he's performing, but, the tens of thousands of rupees is what he would very easily make now from shows that he does. So it's basically a performance of an hour or so, or sometimes even less. And that allows you to make tens of thousands of rupees. So which is why it does definitely pay good money, especially if you've been able to create a niche for yourself like Kamal has. Having said that, it still does get difficult for them. And then I sort of talk about some of that as well with Kamal, how when events dry up and when people don't give you the kind of work that you want, what do you really do? So Kamal, for instance, does get contracted work from other private players or Hindu right-wing organizations where he is made to write or where he's, willingly writing about Hindutva figures and things like that.
And the third figure that you talk about is, well, my namesake, Sandip, also named Sandip Deo. He is sort of interesting in a way where, unlike, say, Kamal or Kavi, who are lone operator artists in a certain way, Sandip is trying to do something different, something bigger in scale. He has a publishing house. Tell us about what his vision is.
So he's written a number of books, Sandeep Dev, with a very mainstream publisher, which is Bloomsbury in India. And he was one of their top selling authors, he tells. But at some point, he has a fallout with Bloomsbury. And then he realizes the limitations of publishing his work within, the boundaries of mainstream publishing in India. And then he realizes that he can't really publish the kind of Hindutva pushing books that he wants to sell. So he sets up and he now has a flourishing publishing house where his mandate is to only and only sell books which promote Hindutva thought, which promote Hindu nationalist ideology, and which relooks at historical figures, which relooks at historical events, like the partition, for instance, and it casts them in a light which is endorsed by the Hindu right-wing ecosystem. So, for instance, he will also, like Kamal, relook at the legacy of someone like a Mahatma Gandhi. He will relook at Jawaharlal Nehru. He will relook at partition and how Gandhi basically gave in to Pakistan. He gave in to Muslims. His books will peddle a lot of these conspiracies without any counter narrative to it. And using that, he's managed to reach quite a few people. But his work is not just that. His work is a lot more, as I describe it, where Sandeep really thinks that he's at the forefront of a cultural war that he's fighting with forces who are fighting Hindutva. And he sees himself as some sort of a charioteer, as some sort of a leader in this cultural war.
And at the same time, in terms of its intent, would you say his publishing house, like a Kaput, is it different in its intent from, say, something we've already had, like a Gita Press?
It's different in the sense that it doesn't crave, the mainstream legitimacy of the Gita Press. There's a wonderful book by Akshay Mughal on the press. I think what Kaput does is rather interesting because it's very, very narrow in its goals and it's very specific in its goals. In fact, Sandeep tells me this fascinating tale of how he used to take these authors and, they used to send him their ideas and their proposals and he would say yes on the basis of what they had sent. But he sometimes realized that a book with its cover, which is, a rather pro-Hindutva sort of cover and very stated pro-Hindutva goals, would still turn out to be a very diluted version of Hindutva in his world. So he started reading through the books that authors would send him before they got published with Kaput. because he didn't want to see any level of dilution in those books. He wanted the ideology to be as crystal clear Hindutva, to be as hardline Hindutva as possible. And I don't think we can say the same about Gita Press, because its work was so much more diverse than just, sort of focusing on pushing the Hindutva agenda. I mean, I speak of other publication houses which try to balance their publications, for instance, Popular Prakashan, and I name a few others as well. So Kaput has no such, illusions about trying to balance things out.
And how is Kaput selling its books? Do people have to buy from their website, or?
People have to buy from their website.
Because he doesn't want to do it through Amazon or Flipkart.
Yes, and that is what is fascinating. And he doesn't want to rely on any of the e-commerce websites because he believes they are anti-Hindu and they are secretly in war with the Hindus. So he constantly names Amazon and Flipkart and says, they are anti-Hindu and I'm going to boycott them, and I'm going to show them that I can create a successful model of publishing without depending on them. In fact, there was an author that, that Sandip Dev published, and his book sold really well. And the author, sort of simply said, oh, can we also then sell it on Amazon? And he says that was the last day I spoke to him and I no longer publish his books because itna dilution ho gaya ki usko Amazon pe bechna hai.
When you have people with such strong ideas and such, they don't want any dilution, did you get the sense in talking to not just to Sandip Deo, but to all these different figures, is their hero Narendra Modi or Yogi Adityanath?
They're very clear their hero is Yogi Adityanath. For most of them, Narendra Modi is a stopgap arrangement till Yogi really comes to power. That is the big Hindutva project that they're now waiting for. And I don't want to get into too much detail because it's all in the book. But in fact, they very clearly also tell me of their disappointments with Prime Minister Modi and his style of functioning and his government. And they believe that, the BJP under Narendra Modi has not been pro-Hindu enough. They believe that, they've appeased Muslims and minorities a lot. And hence, what we should all be looking forward to is Yogi Adityanath. That is what they're sort of waiting for and watching out for.
You spent a lot of time talking to these people, traveling with them, following up on their stories. What did they make of you? Did they know about your beliefs, your ideology?
So, Sandip, I was very clear that, I was there not as a judgmental sort of listener. I really wanted to understand what was driving them. And my stated sort of aim in writing the book was also just this, right? I think keeping all of our ideologies aside, we need to all acknowledge that Hindutva is now a very dominant, sort of political ideology and political thought in the country. And like it or not, people have immense faith and belief in that ideology, right? I think the reason why we are so polarized at this point is just we're not able to see each other's concerns. We sort of take one aspect of the other's ideology and we say, okay, this is bad enough. I don't want to engage with that ideology if this is what they believe in. And it's that lack of understanding of what really drives them that I feel is the cause of a lot of the polarization. So when I started writing the book, I knew there would be difficult times when I would be encountering things which I would not be able to agree with them on. I would be encountering things that I would personally never sort of, endorse or back. But I tried very, very hard to keep my sentiments and my ideologies aside.
Okay, let me stop you there, Kunal. Okay, you keep your sentiments aside, but what would you do when, for example, there was an actual factual issue, whatever it is, the Muslim population growth rate, which is such a huge concern, or there is one place where I think Kavi Singh talks about the fact that she distrusts Muslim because they eat meat and Hindus are sattvic vegetarians, which they're not. At times like that, did you have to say like, okay, I am not going to counter this with my facts, or did you stay back?
Sometimes, there were times when I would nudge them and say, okay, but what about this? Do you not think this is also true? And I think one of the rare occasions when, I did go beyond that Lakshman Rekha that I had created for myself was when I was discussing, the Gandhi Godse poem that we heard from Kamal Agne. I was getting him to, recite the poem and explain to me line by line why he said it. And then I think that was the only time when I sort of did engage completely into it, where I said, but why would you justify, his assassination? Why would you go that far? Why would you not, leave it criticizing what he's done? Not agreeing with him, just criticizing him. You don't have to agree. You don't have to worship him. But why justify his assassination? So I think that was the rare time that I did sort of get into an argument. But otherwise, I was very clear that I was not there to argue with them. I was really there to try and understand what drove them and what drove their work and their belief as well. And because I had to spend 3-4 years with them, be in contact with them for all of these years, I was very clear that I was not going to sit on a high horse and say this is wrong or that is wrong. I think the important point is not my belief in that moment, but to bring their story to a larger audience so that we understand what is driving this world and what is driving a very large population of the country.
Have you heard from them about what they think of the book?
Not yet. They are yet to get their copies. I think they should be getting it in a day or two. I mean, I think they do anticipate because, look, I mean, I am sort of, fairly explicit in some ways on some of my social media accounts about, where I stand and communalism is not something that I would ever endorse or back or agree with, leave alone endorse or back. So I think they know and they realize that. And yet they were gracious enough to, allow me a peek into their world.
Which is interesting. Did that surprise you that they were not just suspicious and say, oh, he's from the other side and therefore, he'll do a hatchet job or something on us, so we shouldn't be talking to him?
It did surprise me because I felt that there would be a lot of, if not cynicism, but they would be very skeptical of why I was there, which is why it took some time. It wasn't easy to get access to either of them. And I didn't hide anything. I said, I believe that people need to know what is driving your work. And I believe that people need to know that this is what a large section of the country is now consuming. And I feel like this is a story that needs to be told to a larger audience, which is, I hope, was the reason why they were then convinced and said, okay, keeping his beliefs aside, this is why we want to engage with him. And I've tried to be as honest about that as possible. I've not really had a big voice in the book, if you've noticed that. I have not really inserted myself into the book as much. I've wanted the book to be, about what they're saying, what they're doing, and what they're telling me.
Did you find yourself empathizing with them more than you thought you would?
I think that is something that, has happened to me before as well, where I've extensively covered hate crimes in the country. And, my work would involve going to the spot where the hate crimes happened, much, much later. So a few months later, sometimes a few weeks later, when the dust has settled, when things are down. And then when you start speaking to people around, you do sort of try and see why they're doing what they're doing, even if you don't agree with it. You try and then make more sense of why they were motivated to do what they did. In a similar way, I think, as much as I don't agree with them at all, I now understand some of the factors that drive them. Not all of them, but I understand some of the factors that drive them, and I see why they're doing what they're doing.
And finally, I was wondering, Kunal, this is not unique to India as you write in the book. I mean, there's white supremacist pop is quite common. Talk about what happened during the civil war in Rwanda between the Hutus and Tutsis and the messages that came out on radio about killing the cockroaches. But is there something in India that makes the Indian version of all of this different?
I think what is different, and the reason why it is also so alarming and sort of dangerous, is that the episode that I talk about in Rwanda as well, right? This was on the eve and then during a civil war. What we are seeing, Sandip, is, a state of ostensible calm. We're not seeing a civil war. We're not seeing violence break out we're not in the middle of a massive communal riot. What makes H-pop so dangerous is that it is consumed on an everyday basis. It is so easy to access and it is so entertaining to access, right? You can be entertained while you are being radicalized by hate, while you're being radicalized by anger and by Islamophobia, while you're being, sort of constantly egged on to hate one community in the country. This is what makes it so dangerous. And then this is why I believe that I think we're at a very different stage as against some of the other examples that I speak to you about, because here it is now happening on an everyday basis. It's very easy to now consume this content. All it sometimes need is, as I discovered in Gumla, all it sometimes need is a trigger and you see an outburst of violence, right? But the process of building that up is what I'm trying to capture in the book. And that process for me is extremely worrisome, because that process can then lead you to any place. It can lead you to a point where hate speech in parliament is no longer a big deal. It can lead you to a place in Uttarakhand where Muslim houses are marked with an X and we don't outrage anymore. It can lead you to a place like in Maharashtra where we're seeing hate rallies, happening very, very regularly, without the police, without the civil society, without anyone doing anything about it, and it not eliciting any outrage at all. So it's the normalizing of hate and bigotry that worries me immensely.
Kunal Purohit, thank you so much for joining us, and Thank you so much for your book.
Thank you so much, Sandip. It was an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Kunal Purohit has been a journalist for nearly 2 decades. He won the Ramnath Goenka Award for Excellence in Civic Journalism in 2012. And he's the author of the new book, H-Pop, The Secretive World of Hindutva Pop Stars. Send us your thoughts and pop culture recommendations wherever you get your podcasts from. Find us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at Express Podcasts. Thanks as always for listening. This show was produced by Shashank Bhargava and edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. This is Sandip Roy on Express Audio.